We there? We on? We good? There we go. I think we're on now. What's up, everybody? So, kind of sticking with not really necessarily the stream, but the content. We're gonna mess around with Pest Browser Testing a little bit today. So there's a little bit of backstory here. If you haven't joined for the previous streams, basically there's a couple, I don't want to call them bugs, although looking at looks like Nuno's getting slammed with some bugs here for Pest in the last several days. Technically this is Pest in general. Let's actually go to the browser testing. I think it's like Pest Browser plugin, maybe. Nope, just kidding. Let's go to packages.org. Pest Browser plugin browser. Had it backwards. There we go. Let's go out here to this. I think he's hidden the issues, but let's see if this is still open. Yes, this is still open. Okay, so here's kind of the backstory. Basically in the last week, I streamed a bunch of streams making the Dusk Converter, and that's now out. Let's go bring this up. laravelshift.com. Let's run shift. Let's just go down to the Dusk Converter. Here it is. Boom. Ha. Beautiful. Okay, so we built this in the last set of streams. It's launched. I dog fooded it. There's been, a couple people that have used it. Not many. Maybe a dozen runs of this. And kind of right away, a lot of people were saying, okay, great, but, these things didn't work. One of the biggest things here, actually, hey, yeah, Mateus is actually on the stream here too. Here's his PR. The biggest thing I noticed with Pest that was actually a bit jarring, and again, let me preface this. Pest Browser Testing, brand new, launched last Thursday, and maybe it's not intended to have the same API or feel as Dusk. I feel like that's kind of the way Nuno pitched it at Laracon US, like, the API should be similar, and not necessarily the same, but similar. But what's interesting is, like, the biggest thing I noticed right away, and the biggest gripe from feedback that I got, as far as support for the Dusk Converter, and this PR fortunately was pretty much opened almost right away, is basically that you can pass a selector to a lot of these things. And in Dusk, typically when you weren't just pressing a button, I'll get to that in a second, when you were clicking something, you could pass it a CSS selector. And if you dig down into Pest, which we will here in a little bit, you'll see that pretty much everything takes a selector, which I think is nice. The problem is, Pest, this plugin is actually doing some stuff that, like, it's trying to be helpful when it kind of shouldn't. Like, I'm a developer. You said I can pass in a selector. Let me pass in a selector. What's kind of happening is there seems to be an attempt to tell if this is a selector or text, meaning like I'm clicking a link with this title, or I'm pressing a button with this title. It seems to kind of try to guess if you're doing a CSS selector or not. That's a tough DX. So long story short is basically you pass in a legitimate selector, what should be a legitimate selector, and it's actually wrapping it. If we look at the error message here, it's actually wrapping it, attempting to look at that for an ID attribute, which is also kind of a weird selector as well. So this is kind of like a really deep error here that's happening. So I think Nuno's looking at this. There's been some back and forth I actually even commented on as well. I think Mateus really gave this a stronger feel. Like if you're passing in any of these special characters, it's a CSS selector. Like don't try to wrap it or do anything fancy with it. So hopefully this gets merged. This was the biggest issue, is that, a lot of times in Dusk, you're targeting things based on a CSS selector, And if you have a really simple one like an ID or a class, this plugin, the Pest plugin, mostly got it right. But once you start doing any kind of more complex CSS selector, it's not going to get it right. You're going to get this error. That's interesting to me. So hopefully this gets merged. It kind of gets tweaked a little bit, and we'll see. Along the same lines, I noticed the same thing with press, which from Dusk, if we go look at Laravel Dusk, and we get into, I think if we look at the description for press, typically press specifically targets a button, I believe, of the text title. Now again, going back to this idea that if we get into the Pest codebase, which again we will here in a second, the description for this is text, not selector. But again, underneath, everything is guessing this selector. So a lot of these issues actually go hand in hand. The API seems like it lines up with Dusk. But when I was doing things like passing this login, it wasn't doing what Dusk used to do. So I think it's difficult. Again, I don't want to say that these are bugs per se. I know Nuno put a lot of work into this, so I'm not trying to beat it up or anything. It's brand new, it's fresh. I just think like maybe a stance needs to be chosen, right? Are we trying to match Dusk? Should this match what the method signatures are doing? Or are we kind of going to go down a little bit of a different path? If we go down a different path, that's fine. But I think it just needs to be like heavily communicated, right? Because right now, it's a little confusing, especially when you're kind of coming from the whole context of like, oh, I'm converting from Dusk, and the API, is using things like visit and type and press. These don't have different method names. I mean, for the most part, like the conversion is pretty straightforward. Like, not a lot of things need changes because you're still using the Laravel testing layer underneath. And again, Nuno has made the API similar. I'm not going to say the same, but he's pretty much made it the same. So let's get into some code. This is all that's kind of like the build up, right? This is all a little bit abstract, but the point is there are some open PRs out here. The final thing I'll mention is I don't think the issues are displayed, but they are accessible. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. He sent me an issue. Anyway, the other final thing I noticed is that there's no contextual closures. So let me see if I can find it here. It might not even be documented. Yeah, here we go. In Dusk, another thing that you could do that was pretty common and helpful is that you could say within, and then you could pass it a selector, and then everything inside of here kind of applied to be within that specific element. It kind of changed the context of what the Dusk browser was working within, right? It was working within the year list, and then it would do certain things. So you didn't have to have like these really complex selectors and so forth where you said like, okay, this, in this thing, in this modal, tap this button, which might also have the same button in like another modal or another form on the page or something like that. You could do this within, which I think is really helpful. Again, a little more advanced. This specifically, I understand why probably wouldn't be in like, the 0.0 version, right? So again, not trying to harp on Pest. It's brand new. Pest Browser Testing. It's brand new. But I think to have a more one-to-one relationship with what a lot of people were probably using Dusk for, and again are using the converter or are converting manually from Dusk to Pest on kind of this promise of speed and ease of use and all that, I think a couple of these things, definitely the selectors need to be cleaned up. So let's try to help out with that. Again, there's already a PR for this. I want to go investigate the button one first, because I think it'll kind of give us a feel for like how Pest works. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make a PR or not. I haven't really looked at this code base. So let's get after it. So to contribute to open source, basically we'll go over here, we'll fork. We'll make this, we'll create it. So we can do all that within GitHub. And I mean, technically we could like do this within GitHub as well. We could edit it in GitHub if we wanted to. They actually have a decent code editor, and I use it when I'm only changing like one small file. But we're actually going to dig around the code base. So let's take a minute. Let's pull it down. Let's set it up in PHP Storm. So let's do a git clone. We'll paste in that clone URL. Let's go into Pest plugin. We'll do, first of all, let's do a git checkout before we forget. So let's check out, I'm just going to call this tweaks. And let's go ahead and do a composer install. While that's running, let's make a new project from existing files. We'll get it on the local server, and this is Pest plugin browser. There it is. Tag that, project root, create. All right, let's bring this up. So let's kind of look at press, specifically around the button, to kind of get a feel for what I'm talking about with this like guessing selectors and kind of like this general, you know, developer experience disconnect, let's call it. Again, I don't think it's a bug, like it works. It just doesn't work the same way Dusk did. That could be by design. I don't know. I'm not Nuno. I don't think he meant to do that. But this also hasn't been merged yet, so maybe it's the way it is. Let's get in here. So I did, just from the errors, I know that page, there's like a page in here that I think it's kind of like where everything happens. So this pending awaitable page, when you do visit, if we get into, I think there's helpers in here somewhere. Where is it? Not auto load. I don't think it's auto load. No, it's, where did he have that? It's not Rector. Where does he load helpers from? Source auto load. Are they in something else? Support? Where are helpers? Well, anyway. If you call visit, which is a function helper, if you call visit in Pest, you'll get a pending awaitable page. All right, and this gives you a browser, device, the URL that it hits, and then any kind of options. This is all what's kind of chained onto it. And ultimately, we dynamically call everything else. So let's go back to the docs just so we can kind of see this code. When you, or well, that's Dusk, even though again, it's supposed to be right. Let's go Pest B4 is here. Let's go to the browser testing section. Where is it? Browser testing. When you go visit on mobile Firefox, that's kind of setting everything up. And then you ultimately say something like click. And click gets forwarded to this awaitable page, right? And so we basically, if you go look at once PHP Storm index, this basically creates the browser, sets everything up, does everything we want, and then if we look at the return of this, I think we get an awaitable web page. But the point is, this new page is really kind of what happens. So we end up getting an awaitable web page, which also does chaining to a web page. So eventually, it's all kind of indirect with this like awaitable stuff. And this pending object pattern is like very common in modern Laravel. Things like the HTTP client use it a lot, for example, the process client. I think even the bus uses it a little bit now. So anyway, in here, I think it's either here or page has press. And this is where it gets a little confusing. It's not here. I think it's in page. It's not even in page. It's actually in the concerns of, I think, interacts with elements. And if we look at press in here we go. There we go, locator. Is that right? No. I don't think that's right. Let's find everywhere press is mentioned. Interacts with elements. Okay, here we go. Yes, it was in interacts with elements. if you look, it says press the button with the given text or name. It takes in a button, text or name, according to this, but it does guest locator. And if we go look at guest locator and we get into this object, we see where we stumble upon that PR that's already open. It has the selector and it tries to figure out, hey, is this an explicit selector? And if it is, then just use it directly. Otherwise, start to try to wrap it in other things, to see if that works. And that's where the problem comes in, is basically this is explicit is not really very robust. I think it just looks for like very basic stuff like, oh, do you start with a hash or a dot? And of course, CSS selectors can be a lot more complicated than that. So first, I think that needs to be cleaned up. But sticking with button for a second, if we go all the way back, this and this don't really line up. And that's kind of the issue, because in Dusk, this was how it worked. You pressed a button with that text or name, right? And that's not really how this is working out. If we go and look at Playwright, and again, I'm not super familiar with all this stuff, but if we go look at Playwright, there is a button. I think there's a way specifically to target the button by text. Let's do this instead. Or wait, nope. Let's do this instead. Playwright. Oh my God, is it doing that for real? Wow, their Command L was actually taking over. Command L normally kicks me in Chrome up to the location bar, the address bar, but they were like hijacking it. That was strange. Not very awesome. Anyway, let's do Playwright press button with text. Here we go. What does AI tell me? Yeah, here we go. So they definitely have a get by role button and then button text here, and then they click. So the point is it can be done. The point is it can be done. Button text, you can do it this way as well, it looks like. Or you can do a locator. If multiple elements have the same text, ensure your selector is specific enough. Yeah. I wonder where, does this come from the docs somewhere? They normally cite it. I've noticed where they cite it a little bit more lately. So they have button text. So theoretically, right now, immediately, we could fix this by just like overriding what gets passed in, right? So if we wanted to, right here, again, given that this is given text or name, we could immediately change this guest locator. We could just say button equals button colon text, and then, quote this. Or well, if I get my quotes right. So we could do that, theoretically. So you could immediately fix this by just wrapping in the selector, not allowing a selector with press. Now what's the difference, right, between press and click, for example? If we go look back up at click, right now, somewhere, click, there it is. Yeah, click and press are doing the exact same thing. So there's really no difference between these two, right? Click the link with the given text, same thing. Well, it's kind of like text or selector. So to me, there needs to be a differentiation between the two. Right now, there's none. They both do exactly the same thing. They have the same functionality. So why even have click versus press? To me, I would think, and again, this is where Dusk kind of distinguished between the two. Click allows selectors, right? It's just a generic click event, whereas press is like, press this button with this text. I don't know the right answer for that. I'm not the package author. I don't know what direction kind of Nuno would want to take this. So, you know, I don't know the appropriate quote unquote fix. So I don't necessarily see these as bugs. They're unintuitive behavior that makes for kind of a tough DX, especially when you're coming from Dusk. And again, on the surface, given the documented name here, it doesn't behave that way. It's also not limiting this just to buttons. So like, even if you wanted to allow a selector, I feel like something needs to be done here to like either not have this align and you change this to, you know, selector, and then you're getting completion on the front end, you know, a little bit better. Not front end like JavaScript, but as the developer, you're getting completion in your IDE that no longer says button or name, it says, you know, selector, and so you get it. So it's cool that everything kind of uses this guest locator, but it's kind of making it's a little unintuitive, and guest locator doesn't really work for all CSS selectors. So again, I don't know the right answer here. I'd personally rather this be what this doc block says, text or name. And here's the thing, this is all just released. So if this isn't kind of adjusted early on, now you have inertia where it's difficult to make these changes later, because now people were using press with selectors, right? This just came out last Thursday, so like kind of these things need to be tweaked immediately, or this stance kind of needs to be taken, in my opinion, because the more people that start to use press instead of click, selector versus text, like, you know, now it's kind of like a quote unquote breaking change, whereas right now it's undefined behavior, especially with the guest locator not really functioning, you know, at its best. So anyway, I'm here in the chat. I know I'm kind of like chatting more today, but the problem is I don't know Playwright. I don't know the right solution here, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on a PR just to have it closed immediately, because that's not either how Playwright works, or that's not, you know, the button. That's not what Nuno wants to do with press. Thomas, initially, I think the idea was to mimic Dusk as much as possible. At least that's what happened months ago in one of New. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think given the names and the fact that everything lines up, like, and again, clearly, even forget Dusk, the documentation says given text or name. So yeah, I mean, the documentation from here says given text or name. What does browser testing say? Press. Given text or name. So they don't advertise that you can pass in a selector here, either in the documentation or at the code level. So to me that means you should do this. To me that means you should do this. So I don't know, maybe I should submit this. I don't know. This is a top voted thing. Has text is text content properly between the tags. Now it says, the problem is it says text or name. That's where it's a little bit difficult. So that's where, yeah, exactly. I do think press should be button text specific. The or name part is what I want to try to cover now. So we have this. Let's say I'm just gonna say we're gonna submit this right now. We need to learn a little bit more about Playwright though. So let's go back to Playwright. Playwright has this kind of get role by name, and they pass in a button and they pass it a name. Now what is name, right? This will locate an element of role button and an accessible name, which often corresponds to text content, okay? and then click it. The name option can also accept a regular expression for partial matching. Fancy. Yeah, This method allows you to select a button. Oh, this is a locator. Okay. Well, locator returns a locator, so like using text is, this is similar to text but matches the smallest amount with exact text. It seems like these are, I don't think these are CSS approved. I feel like this is, yeah, I feel like this is like I feel like this is a Playwright pseudo class. I don't think this is real CSS, is it? Is that real? Is real. Yeah, is there a CSS selector? No. No. Okay, so that seems to be maybe a Playwright thing. Let's go to Playwright. Playwright CSS selectors. Other locators. Okay, so CSS button has text. Matching by text. Has text. Okay. Matches an element containing the specified text inside, possibly a child or the matching. Okay. Matching is case insensitive, trims white space, and searches for a substring. Okay. Note that it has to, okay, text. The text pseudo class matches the smallest element containing specific text. Matching is case insensitive, trims, and searches for a substring. Okay. This will find an element with the text home somewhere inside navbar. Exact text. Okay. Does not match. Okay, so text is log, does not match login because button contains a single node login. It's not equal to log. However, text is log matches button log span. Ooh, interesting. That's kind of interesting that the span throws it off. Text matching always normalizes white space. For example, it turns multiple spaces into one, turns line breaks into spaces, and ignores. Okay, so that's nice. For example, text login matches input type button value login. Wait a second, what? Input elements, oh, input elements of type button. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so button. Let's do press button. So get role button, nice. So what did they call it? Like by role? Yeah, by role button. What's by role? Didn't really want to learn Playwright today, but let's do it. By role locator. Okay, page by role. Name. Okay, here we go. So heading, name, sign in to be visible. You can locate each element by its implicit role. What does name take? Arguments is role. Okay. Boolean. Whether the name is matched exactly, case sensitive, and whole string defaults to false. Okay, fine. Oh, these are options. Okay. Include hidden level name. Okay, option to match the accessible name. By default, matching is case insensitive. Use exact to control this. Learn more about accessible name. What is accessible name? The value of the accessible name may be derived from a visible text alternative. So I feel like, to me, that seems like it could almost be like the ARIA text too, which is kind of strange. Yeah. So what does this really do? What does click really do? Send message click. Let's kind of see how it actually talks, because none of this really matters if we're not talking to Playwright correctly. Okay, so we have a locator. We have a locator. And then it seems like we send message. Okay, so send message. Default param selector is this selector. If not set strict, then strict is in strict mode. Strict mode is true by default. Okay, interesting. Final params, we merge them together, and then we execute in a certain frame or page, method, params. Okay, what does execute do? Okay, it takes the WebSocket. Okay, so it basically sends this message across the WebSocket. So there's some kind of RPC, you know, yeah. There's some kind of RPC communication going on here. RPC meaning remote process calls. That might not be the exact definition, but it's what I know in my mind. So, so there's a format here where basically PHP through the WebSocket is going to talk to Playwright underneath. What I'm curious about is, does anywhere in here do, I just want to find an example of like get, what was it, get by role? No? Is that what we were using? Oops. Is it get, it was get by role, right? Yeah, get by role. That's what they're suggesting. So nowhere in here are they using get by role. Oh, get by, okay. Here we go. Selector, get by role selector, okay. Create a locator that matches elements with a specific role. Here we go. So we pass in params. Get by role selector gives you back that. Okay, name, if options is that. Okay, here we go. Okay, internal. See, they use an internal. So, okay, so he's wrapped this. He's wrapped get by role selector. This is in selectors. So if we do a get by role one more time. So they're definitely doing it. Button, what's he doing here? Button name is submit form. Handles the option without exact flag. Okay, so he's already doing this. So get by role and locator calls selectors get by role. Okay. Page get by role. This locator, okay. And page get by test ID. Page interest. See, where I always forget where page comes across. So let's go back to get. So this has a locator. This does not have a locator. Everything's this guest locator. What does this work with? This is used within web page. Web page has access to page. I'm just trying to see how I would get into. See, they all use guest locator. It's like, how do you get into where we need to go? This gives you back a locator. So I would think really what you need to do here, I would think, is you would need to do something where you were like this page get by role, and you'd pass it button, and then you'd pass it name, oops, sorry, name, arrow button. And this gives you a locator. And then you would say, basically, locator click. I think that's what you would do. Yeah, this returns a locator. It takes the parameters, returns a locator, which is what guess locator was doing as well. So yeah. To me, that would be the fix, based on kind of loosely what I know. I don't feel very confident submitting this. But I guess we could run the test suite and see what happens. Right? Vendor bin pest. Oh, shit. This is not going to go well. Okay. I already know this isn't going to work. It's not going to work because I'm on a very, very old Mac, and I know on my Mac Playwright was not happy. I actually had to update my Mac to the latest version of the OS. It might use an old version. We'll see. I think the problem was not so much that Playwright didn't work, it's that Pest Browser Testing required a higher version than what was being installed on my machine. Let's give it a minute though, let's see. Yeah, see, we got this frozen WebKit for super old Mac. This iMac's like 2018. I would kind of expect a lot of exceptions here. If so, I think it's probably because of the Playwright version. Oh, okay, well, it's running. Let's see if one fails relating to the button press, right? What I would like to see is a failure for the button press where like it says, oh, it kind of expected this selector, but it got this one instead. That's what I would like to see. I don't know how long this test suite takes to run. I'm also too, like, allows locating elements by their ARIA attribute, and accessible name. See, this is what they recommend, but like, again, I'm not sure if this is what, they would want. So, anyway. I'm willing to submit it because I think it gets the conversation started. And then from there, I can know, like, okay, is press strictly limited to buttons with text? And if so, things can be, tweaked accordingly. But if that's not the direction, like, Nuno wants to go, then, close the PR and whatever. You can just pass whatever you want to press, and it's basically just an alias for click. Hey everybody, thanks for joining live. Is it Siraj? Siraj, maybe? Hey Robin, I ran into errors doing screenshot matching in my CI. Seems like font issue. Ended up removing screenshot matching. Yeah, I haven't done any of the screenshot matching yet. It definitely is a cool feature. I could see though on different OSs, like getting some false positives or some, I guess, false negatives. Where like it failed, but it really just didn't match because it's like a pixel off on, GitHub Actions, Mac versus your local Mac kind of thing. I wonder if there's a way to like set a tolerance. Probably not. I mean, the whole point is to screenshot match, but I wonder if there's like a tolerance where it's like, hey, if something is 1 pixel off or within 5% pixels or something, like, fine. I think we're going to have to limit the tests to just be our button pressing. So let's go find web page. And web page is the one that interacts with stuff. Oh, here we go. Click. Is there a press test? Here we go. We're getting down there now. Here we go, press test. There we go. That's what we want. Let's Tests, browser, web page, press, test. Let's just run this. Hopefully. Yeah, going back to that font thing, Robin, you know, what's interesting is when I've run the Pest Browser testing locally, I've also noticed that my entire site design, it's almost like my assets, my CSS assets aren't loading. I don't know if yours was that extreme. I think that's probably something specific to my project, maybe in the way I'm using Vite, but like, I did notice that when I had the screenshots, they all were like missing the style sheet. Like my page was just old school HTML on a white background, like all stacked. Anyway, okay, let's see what's actually failing here. Screenshot. Okay, so screenshot here. Let's open this. We'll go look at the test in a second, but we'll open this. So here's just a submit button. Okay, so there's nothing to really see here. Let's open the test instead. So where's my test name? We're getting a deeper stack here. All right, let's go back here and let's go into press test. There we go. Okay, so it may pay. Okay, so data test, my button, type button, ID submit, on click, result. .text content. Okay, let's look at this. What is this doing? So the button submit. He's saying visit, press at my button. Okay, so press a button with name. So he's got name. So this doesn't work either. Submit button. Okay, that doesn't work. That's fine. May press an input button. Can we just press like... So he's not really pressing a button with text here. Let's change this. Let's add one more. May press a button with data test attribute. That's what you're really testing here. That's kind of the wrong test. May press a button with text would actually, in my opinion, be this. And we press this. Let's see if this one passes. I understand why the others are failing, but let's see if this one now passes. I would kind of expect 3 failures and 2 passes now. Okay, we did get 2. Okay, so press a button with ID. I understand why that one doesn't work. It may press a button with name. Not so happy that that one doesn't work. It presses a button with data test attribute. I understand why that one doesn't work either. The one by pressing with text and the one by pressing an input button do work though, because they press click me, which is the text. It's the value in this case of the button. So it works for an input type button as well as a regular button. To me, these other tests do not line up with the documentation, meaning that you don't do it by name. However, I do think they should work. I do think if you pass in, I mean, theoretically, this should be click, but I can understand why this one should work. And it'd be very easy to make this one work. Like, if you have an @ symbol that starts, we're going to assume that you're, you know, a very specific data test attribute. The problem is name. Name is the difficult one, because this says with the given text or name. That's difficult. I think to make that work, you'd either need to have a complex... Well, let's go see. Let's go see if git role... Does git role have any additional things? Can you pass it in? An attribute is usually set by, okay, include hidden, name, option name to mask the accessible name, use exact, that's fine, pressed. So there's nothing in here that like, and you'd have to know that locator found something. And again, I don't know. Creates a locator that matches both this locator and the argument locator. Oh. Interesting. Interesting. So we could make a compound locator. We could make a compound locator. You could say, it's kind of nasty, but you could do it. You could say something like, let's go back here. So if we go up here and we get by role, we could say locator and then we would say this guess locator. And you'd basically have to be, we'd write the CSS select. We don't even want to use guest locator to be honest. But we would, we would say something like button name equals, you know, our thing, right? And again, this isn't going to work right now because guest locator is broken. So we'd have to say something like page locator. And here's our selector. So, do we want and? I think we probably want or, right? Is there an or? There's got to be an or. Yeah, we want an or. Because you're not going to match both. So you have to be a button with this visible name, or you have to be a button with a name that matches what you passed in. This honors that. Let's see if this now makes more things pass. I would expect 2 and 3 now. I would expect this to flip because the name one should pass. That selector's not robust enough in fairness. Okay, so what didn't pass? It may press a button with a name. What is this? Let's go see what that looks like. Press a button with a name. Button type name submit dash button. Okay. So this page locator button name. Is this the correct? Is that the correct thingy? That should be the correct thing to get a button by name. The name attribute is equal to that, right? Let's dump. Can we dump locator? Is there like a toString maybe? Whatever, let's dump locator and see what happens. Didn't seem like it got our or. There's also like a lot of things here. Our number of dumps do not line up to the same thing. Okay, so submit worked. It seems like it's not honoring our or selector. So it found I, and then this one, it's almost like it retried. And then submit button name. Roll button name submit. That's interesting. Down here it's saying roll again. That selector feels weird. Something about that selector feels weird. This returns a locator, right? Yep. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's do this and see if it changes our... Maybe our OR is a little weird. Yeah, maybe the printout, or I don't know what dump is actually showing here. So we got one that passed now, which I would think would be the name thing. Yeah, name did pass. So our selector is good. It's almost like OR doesn't do what we think it does. Let's go see. This selector. Create a locator matching either this selector or the argument selector. Okay, so it takes the selector and then throws a comma on the selector that's passed in. That's the original one. Okay. So I didn't see any commas. Oh, this gives you a new one. Ah, that's my fault. There we go. There we go. Let's try this again. Now I expect 2 and 3. Whoa. This must have some built-in retrying. Look at this. This is dumping like crazy. 5 failed. Okay. Failed parsing. Expected symbol. What did I break? Error while parsing selector. Okay. Internal role, name button, comma. Oh. I don't think it knows. I don't think it knows this internal thing. Crap. Do I have to like preface that somehow? Yeah. There's something about the way that this uses... I think this internal flag is something Pest does. Yeah. I think there's some parsing that's probably happening a little bit lower on what it actually sends across to Playwright. And I think this comma is throwing it off. Yeah. I'd have to dig into this more. I think it's starting to become a little unproductive. Anyway, I think what really needs to happen here is... What I would like to see happen is, first of all, this to work. I just think using a compound selector might not be the thing you want to do. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. But then also what I would do is I would say if str starts with an @ symbol, not that, an @ symbol, then I would say locator is equal to this guest loader, and just let this do its thing, because this I think this figures out. I think it figures out if you're an @ sign. Or you would say this page, I think there's like a get by test ID. Yeah, let's try this. Substring, yeah. Else, do this. I'm gonna chop off this extra line for now, just so it goes back to working. think we killed that dump too. Yeah, okay. So, again, I would expect 2 and 3 here, but not name to pass, the data selector to pass. The test ID selector to pass. No, it's still 3 and 2. So ID definitely would fail. I understand that. Name still fails because our OR is not working. The data attribute, though, is still failing. That's kind of interesting to me. So get by test ID. What does this do? Test ID. Oh, that's interesting. I thought it was data attribute test. I thought this was just test. Locate an element that matches elements by test ID. I thought this was just data test. Selector get. See how all these have internal? That's interesting. I thought they have test. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is kind of a mess. Well, it's called test ID, not test, so I guess it's something else. Does locator wrap an internal? No, see, locator doesn't wrap an internal. It just takes the selector. Yeah, you'd have to see like the call. Yeah, I'd have to really understand how these selectors are ultimately getting passed down. I think once you see, once you start to do something a little complex here, this kind of, it's over my head at the moment. Yeah, I just want to make a selector, like, yeah, you would really just end up saying something like data test equals, but I don't even know if this will work. I kind of want to get this to work, and then I'm giving up. So let's put a dot here. Let's close it. Yeah, and you would have to be a button, right? You have to be a button. You have to be a button with the data test attribute of what you passed in. Now, again, I think there's probably a shorthand somewhere in the pest library here that probably does this, but I don't know where that is, so I'm gonna leave it alone. I'm just trying to write I'm trying to write as much code that I think should work and adjust the test, because I think that's a PR worthy thing, right? So I'm just trying to get that close. And this is better. So we are back on track here. The test attribute works. So the way this test should be written, in my opinion, is this, right? So basically you would say, it can press a button by the text, it can press a button by the name, and it can press a button by the data attribute, because anything should be able to do that, in my opinion. That's the way I think it should work. And then it needs to be able to do the same thing for input type buttons, right? Once you've proven that all of these end up passing, I think that's the right approach. So it's like, it may press an input button by name, and then it may press an input button by test attribute, right? Is that what they call it? Data test attribute. So these would need to be cleaned up, but the point here is that you would have like name equals input button, and you would press it by input button. Oh, sorry, that's the name one. All right, let's take these. Let's take these and put them down here. All right, by name, and then finally, you would say data test is, what did they call it up here? Data test my button. Yeah, okay, let's just do the same thing. My button and you would say at my button. Now, I would expect only 2 to pass. Sorry, 3. I would expect 3 to pass and 3 to fail. Yes. And I expect the data attribute 1 to fail for the input button because we explicitly wrote that. We explicitly wrote that to just be button. And then I would expect the other 2 that are already failing. So the input button by name to fail because it's not even working for our top one either. So when all 3 of these pass, I would think that press works the way you would expect with the works the way it's documented, with the added benefit that you can also pass it a test attribute, a data test attribute. Now, in my opinion, it probably shouldn't support that one. You should just call click directly with your data test attribute, but it doesn't. I mean, it's one line of code really to support it. So I think once I kind of figure out how these OR locators can actually work, then you basically just chop one on for the other inputs, right? The other input types. You got roll button. It's interesting that roll button picks up the input type button. That's kind of nice. Because now you're going to have to do input type. You're going to have to do input type button, and then you're going to have to do input type submit, technically too, because submit is a button and it can be an input type. So like this roll covers that. So it's unfortunate that you can't pass in a selector here. So I may dig into that too. There might be a one-line way to do this with Playwright. So I'm gonna look into that some more, but I think this kind of emphasizes, like, again, there's some nuance here. There's some nuance here to the plugin browser testing. I think there's some rough edges that need to be smoothed out for this to be like infinitely usable, right? Dusk, you have to remember, it's not like Dusk came out and was never touched. I mean, it's had years of, it's matured for years. So some of these things like within and some of these things I'm talking about, like, they weren't in there probably with V1. I mean, this is effectively V1 of Pest Browser Testing. So again, I by no means am harping on it per se. I was ready for it to have, one-to-one, kind of a one-to-one comparison with Dusk. And that's probably a poor assumption on my part. It was an unfair assumption on my part. So anyway, hopefully these will get merged. I will go ahead and push this PR up once I kind of look at that OR locator a little bit more. I do think this is helpful. And again, I think it's important to get these as early as possible because the longer you wait, the more people that might be using press when really they should be using click and all that kind of stuff. So, or just devs kind of banging their heads against the wall and thinking, oh, Pest Browser Test doesn't work like Dusk. It does, and it's supposed to, I think. It just has a couple rough edges need to be smoothed out. So thanks everybody for joining live. We'll pick things up next week, probably on a different topic. Let me know if you have any ideas on Twitter. Otherwise, yeah, I'll just pick one myself of whatever I need to work on next Wednesday. See y'all.